John Schneider. Turns out that was the right move, eh?
Tough to argue at this point.
It's pretty tough to argue. He has really impressed me in that interim manager position. He has done everything right. Let's just take a look at the win-loss column. So when Charlie Montoyo left, left, that's a nice way of saying it. When Charlie Montoyo was so generously showing the door and he left.
Yes, when he resigned, um, when he said, you know what, I'm better than this, I don't need you, and left the Blue Jays. July 13th was just after an ugly trip to Seattle.
Very ugly.
Blue Jays had a record of 46 and 42. They were 4 games above 500. Winning percentage, 523. They were on pace for 85 wins. Now, if I look at my MLB standings here, that is not good enough to get us in the playoffs.
No, it is not. And you'll remember, listen, we're not saying that this was all on Charlie. Obviously, at the time, the offense was scuffling to a disastrous level. All of us were pulling our hair out because if there's one thing about this team, it's that offense has always been a strong point. I mean, the way the roster was constructed, it was constructed to mash and maybe make up for a few pitching holes here and there. And we'll get into this a little bit more. I know MLB has just released their rankings of lineups and pitchers. And just to put it in perspective, the Blue Jays, and we'll go more in depth, but the Blue Jays were ranked number 2 out of the 12 playoff teams, behind only the Dodgers when it comes to their lineup and the way that they are going to hit, right? Their offense is a top 2 offense out of all the playoff teams. Pitching was ranked 11 out of 12. Now, it's still a good pitching staff. It just goes to show you how good the pitching gets once you get to the playoffs. The Mariners were ranked 8th, just to put it in perspective.
Yeah, I'd have to really think about this, but is there a better pitching staff that missed the playoffs? You know what I'm saying? Like, are the 12 best pitching staffs all playoff teams?
I think it pretty much lined up that
probably
way.
Pretty close, if not.
It's pretty darn close. Or at least you can make a few arguments for those 11 and 12, like the last 2 teams there. But so what I'm saying is this isn't all on Charlie Montoyo, but wow, what a turnaround, because John Schneider, obviously with them finishing at 92 wins, was on a much better pace than an 85 win.
So John Schneider, since he took over, Blue Jays are 46 and 28. That is 18 games above 500, obviously in a lot fewer games. Winning percentage, 622. That is a pace of 101 wins, which the Yankees finished the season with 99 wins. So,
and I think the big differences with what John Schneider has done is the way he has managed the bullpen, and obviously the front office went out and bolstered the pen with Anthony Bass, Zach Pop, just adding some more high leverage choices goes a long way. But I also just think that the way that John Schneider has managed the bullpen was much better. You know, I know I noticed it myself, but I heard it on Blair and Barker this morning, and one of the things that they brought up was just the fact that when Charlie was managing this bullpen, you would see him get 2 guys up at a time. And kind of roll with, not really be decisive, where John Schneider has been incredibly decisive. I know, and listen, there are some big-time Charlie detractors. I know our good friend in chat here, Taco Time, who's been a long-time supporter of the walk-off here. He says, of course it was on Charlie. Good riddance. And there's a lot of people that feel that way. And it may be the case. We'll need to wait and see. If Charlie Montoyo does not get another sniff at the manager job, then that goes a long way to say what the rest of the league felt about his ability to manage. But I was really on the fence if John Schneider was the guy, because you hear all of the talk within the front office of collaboration. It's a collaborative effort. And so when you take the team that was under Charlie Montoyo, you would think that it was all a very collaborative thing. But we're kind of getting the sense that, you know what? Maybe there are more responsibilities on this Blue Jays manager than we had originally thought. I know Adam used the term puppet a lot, right? And where we even both were like, what does it even matter who's managing? All of this is coming from the guys upstairs in the khakis anyways.
Charlie Montoyo pitched part of 4 seasons for the Toronto Blue Jays. Can you guess what his record was? Just give me like a plus or minus 500.
Okay, sorry, say that again.
Charlie Montoyo
Yeah.
managed for this Blue Jays team for parts of 4 seasons, right? 3.5 seasons, basically. Can you tell me or guess what his record was? Wins and losses. Give me 500 plus or minus. Like 5 games over, 20 games under.
I'm going to guess 500. Like
you nailed it. You nailed it.
Really?
236 and 236. Yeah.
Wow.
So there you go. It doesn't scream, give me another job, but look, to his credit, I don't want this to become the poop on Charlie Montoyo hour. Last couple seasons, like going through the COVID year, right? Playing in Buffalo and Dunedin. Those were, dealing with the border restrictions and no fans in the stands. And those were choppy waters to sail through,
yes,
I think, to say the
absolutely.
least, right? So, tip of the cap and a good farewell to our good friend Papa Charlie, but as Taco Time puts it, good riddance. And
there's other, like, I know Northern Growler here in chat just said, I love how aggressive the new manager is, puts pressure on other teams, and that's another thing that we've watched is they're running far more with John Schneider at the helm. We're seeing that aggressiveness out of this team, and it's very cool to look back at the relationships that John Schneider has built throughout his decade with this Blue Jays organization. Of course, he has managed the Dunedin Blue Jays, he has managed the Fisher Cats, he has managed the Canadians, he has been entrenched in this organization. He's known Tim Mesa since 2012. Like, think about that. He has managed or been a part of Tim Mesa's life, a 30-year-old, for 1/3 of his life. He has been a part of Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero's childhood, basically, to date.
That is no exaggeration.
And I think there's rope given to a guy who is that entrenched in your life that wouldn't be given to a guy like Charlie. A great example is when John Schneider came out and blasted Vladdy after the game that he hit that double where he admired it and then it hit off the top of the fence. And then, of course, he panicked and was like, I'm going to try and make up for my mistake right now. And then got thrown out at second by a mile.
By a mile.
Like, in your opinion, Adam, can you see Charlie Montoyo after that play coming out and saying Vladdy made a mistake?
No, because it wasn't the first time Vladdy had made a mistake. And, Charlie had those opportunities to do so.
Yes.
Charlie wasn't that guy. I think one thing with, John Schneider that he brings to the table, or to the clubhouse, however you want to put it, is that he does have that experience in the minor leagues with these kids, right?
Yes.
So a lot of the managerial choices and the tactics that he has, right, whether it's moving Bo around the batting order and specifically leaving Vladdy where he is in the batting order, right?
Mm-hmm.
When to put your arm around a guy and when to poke him in the chest.
Yes.
It's not necessarily just a skill that you just breathe out. It is a little bit of trial and error, I think. And he would have gone through those trials and errors in the minor leagues, through AA, through AAA, with these kids, where he's poked Vladdy in the chest, seen how he responds to it, put his arm around him, see how he responds to that, and what formula in the middle. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. But like it's all that stuff that like years behind the scenes of building these relationships. I know, like when I was a kid playing sports, I was not the kind of kid who would respond to like yelling and being put down. I was more
Mm-hmm.
of I would respond to the coach building my confidence up and being like, "Hey, you're playing like shit. We know you can do better. We need you to do better. Come on, man." And that would be a lot better than having them try and make me cry in front of my teammates, right? But like
Yes,
some people do respond to that. So
of course. It's
it's
person to person, and it's knowing your team, and that is one thing John Schneider does very well is know his team. Quick little correction here. It's Northern Grower. I know I was saying growler. It's Northern Grower like weed, not growler like beer. Get it right. Either way, I'm on board.
we got our priorities
um,
sorted out.
so let's shift really quickly here. We were talking about how John Schneider has operated with this bullpen and how great he has been with his bullpen decisions. Obviously, every manager there are decisions you can take and pick it apart, but on the most on for the most part, he has done a great job of managing this bullpen. But there's more than just the fact that he's good at managing a bullpen involved in this, and I think Anthony Bass is a big reason why it has looked that way. You don't need to rely on Jimmy Garcia and Romano near as heavily in those big time situations. What it allowed to do, the acquisition of Anthony Bass at the trade deadline and Zach Pop for Jordan Groshans, was it didn't take anybody off of this roster, and it gave so much more in the bullpen for them to bump guys like Simber down, because Simber was that high leverage guy. And listen, Simber is still getting high leverage situations, but different high leverage situations, right? High leverage situations in the 6th inning, in the 5th inning coming out of the bullpen, rather than being interjected into a game in the 8th and needing to get out a lefty, which is what they were kind of using Simber for, especially when Tim Meza was on the IL. Mm-hmm. Anthony Bass, like, he has been incredible for this team, right? And you don't need to just listen to Adam and I say it. The numbers say it.
Yeah, the numbers say it. Let's pull up his stats here. There we go. Magic of television. Stats are now beside me, Scott. You just got to take my word for it.
Okay.
So we've got his total for the season here. We've got his time with Miami, the Marlins, and his time with Toronto down below. So he has not been as good in Toronto as he was with Miami, but still very good numbers. Obviously, Toronto is a hitter-friendly ballpark, so that's something to take into consideration. But whip around like 1.1.
Mm-hmm.
Ks per 9, sitting around 10, not walking a lot of guys.
Mm-hmm.
ERA 1.75. Not that like ERA is the best way to measure a bullpen arm, but
when it's that good, it means something.
it means something. You don't want a bad ERA no matter when you're pitching. I'll tell you that for free.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what else you want to say about Anthony Bass. He's been very valuable, quiet.
I know that there are some
here.
people who have brought up the 5 home runs that he's given up in a Toronto Blue Jays uniform. And to that I say, there is something to be said for a guy who, when they're up by 2 or 3 runs, are going to go out there and challenge the hitter. Yes, he's given up 5 home runs. All of them solo, by the way.
He has 5 home runs.
I would far rather see a guy come out and challenge hitters than go out there and walk guys, right?
So he has 5 home runs he's given up in Toronto. Those account for all 5 of his earned runs.
Yeah.
So there you go. I mean, it's the same mentality that Jordan Romano has, right? Like, a narrative is depending on how you look at it, right? Like, does he struggle with giving up the long ball, or does he challenge a guy? And Yeah, for me, like I want to see Jordan Romano throwing hard and challenging a guy. I don't want to see him pitching around the corners, dipsy doodling, because that's when you get base runners. That's when you get into trouble. So, yeah.
One last
How?
thing on Anthony Bass before we move on. I know we're
Okay.
probably overdoing it on the Bass stuff, but he was touching 97. You know, for a guy that everyone talks about his slider and his secondary stuff, he can throw a fastball. We really appreciate all of you within the walk-off community. This thing continues to grow and become an animal of its own. It's a little bit overwhelming, but honestly, we love talking Blue Jays baseball and all the interaction that you folks are involved with us. Thank you so much. Discord, feel free to join it. That is always free. The show, or the link is in the show notes. You can follow us on Twitter at Walk Off Podcast, on Instagram, the Walk Off Podcast. And if you are watching on YouTube currently and you're not subscribed, we'd really appreciate if you hit that subscribe button. All the best, everybody. Cheers.